Okay, so you've got this pile of sources in front of you, articles, official reports, news clips, and you really want to get to the heart of a topic fast. Cut through all the noise. Well, that's exactly what we do here on the deep dive. Today, we're diving into U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. You probably know it as ICE. We're going to unpack who they are, how they actually operate based on these materials we've got, uh, who they target for enforcement, and really importantly, some key rights you should know about.
And yeah, the source mix is pretty interesting. We've got material from advocacy groups like the Immigrant Defense Project, the ACLU, but also directly from Homeland Security, their own press releases, their annual reports, plus a law blog, some news bits, social media stuff about specific incidents. So the goal is really to get that kind of 360-degree view straight from the documents you provided.
All right, let's start with the basics. Looking at these sources, ICE really emerges as the main agency inside the U.S. dealing with immigration enforcement. We're talking detention, deportation, that kind of thing.
That's its core job, yeah. And you can't really understand ICE without seeing where it fits in the bigger picture, which is the Department of Homeland Security, DHS.
Right, DHS, huge department set up after 9/11.
Mm.
Who else is under that big umbrella that deals with immigration? Because ICE isn't the only one.
No, definitely not. You've got USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services.
Yeah.
They handle the paperwork side, the applications for visas, green cards, citizenship. Then there's CBP, Customs and Border Protection. That includes Border Patrol. They're focused mainly on the border itself.
Okay.
IC handles the enforcement inside the country. And they also do things like manage check-in appointments for people already here in the system.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's dig into how ICE actually works operationally. Based on these sources, it's not just one big thing, right? It seems broken down.
Yeah, it's got distinct parts with pretty different jobs.
Yeah.
The two main ones that jump out from these reports are ERO enforcement and removal operations and HSI, which is Homeland Security Investigations.
ERO. Okay, so that sounds like the part doing the interior enforcement.
That's right. They're primarily focused on finding, arresting, and ultimately removing non-citizens who the government deems removable under the law.
And the numbers in the FY 2024 ICE report really give you a sense of the scale here. ERO made, what, 113,431 administrative arrests?
Yeah, and the report breaks that down. Over 33,000 of those were at-large arrests, so not at the border, but out in communities.
Right.
And they removed a huge number of people, too. 271,484 non-citizens who had final orders of removal, sent them to 192 different countries just in FY24.
And the report really emphasizes the criminal history part. For a chunk of those removed, over 88,000 had criminal charges or convictions.
It does. It says over 30% of those removed had criminal histories. And get this, the average was 5.63 convictions or charges per person in that group.
Wow.
It also lists out categories like over 3,700 known or suspected gang members, 237 known or suspected terrorists, and 8 human rights violators. And they note that last number was up by a third from the year before.
So how does ER actually find people? The sources mention intelligence techniques.
Yeah, law enforcement and intelligence methods. They talk about targeting operations centers, giving real-time leads to the field offices. And ERO has specific teams for this, like 129 fugitive operations teams, plus these mobile criminal apprehension teams. Their job is basically tracking down and arresting people who are considered at large, sometimes in bigger coordinated operations.
And they use something called detainers a lot, right? The report mentioned almost 150,000 issued in FY 2024.
149,764, yeah. That was up nearly 20% from FY23.
Can you just quickly explain what a detainer is based on how the sources describe it? Because that term comes up quite a bit.
Sure. So a detainer is basically ICE sending a request to, say, a local police department or a county jail. They ask that agency to hold on to someone for up to 48 hours after they would normally be released.
Oh, okay.
Gives ICE a window to come and pick them up.
And the report connects these detainers to specific alleged crimes.
Yeah, it gives examples like over 80,000 detainers linked to assault charges, over 21,000 for sexual assault or sex offenses, about 4,000 related to homicides. It categorizes why they're issuing them.
And ERO manages people both in detention facilities and also this much larger group who aren't detained.
Exactly. And that non-detained population has just exploded, apparently. The report says it's largely driven by migration at the southwest border.
That number was really striking. End of FY 2024, over 7.6 million non-citizens on the non-detained docket, either waiting for their case or already having a final removal order.
It just underscores the sheer volume of cases ICE is juggling. And the report says ER's priorities for who they actually go after, who they try to locate and arrest, tend to be people seen as risk to public safety, national security, or flight risks.
Okay, so that's ERO, focused on the interior enforcement, arrests, removals. Let's switch over to HSI, Homeland Security Investigations. This feels like a very different animal, based on the sources.
It really is.
Yep.
HSI is ICE's criminal investigative branch. Their focus is much broader. They're tackling transnational crime, big homeland security threats, often really complex investigations that cross borders.
And their stats for FY24 reflect that difference. They made over 32,000 criminal arrests. That's different from ERO's administrative ones.
Totally different. These are arrests for breaking criminal laws, not just for being potentially deportable. And HSI reports these huge seizures, too, like over 1.6 million pounds of narcotics.
Including a lot of fentanyl.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, significant amounts. Also, over $886 million in criminal cash and assets, and almost $200 million in virtual currency seized. And one number that really jumps out is they identified or recovered over 1,780 child victims of exploitation.
Yeah, that's a tough number to hear. 1,780 kids.
It is. So HSI is going after things like transnational criminal organizations, TCOs. They even have units stationed internationally, these TCIUs, Transnational Criminal Investigative Units.
The report calls out some specific HSI work, like on the opioid crisis, seizing over 42,000 pounds of fentanyl and other opioids in FY24. Mentioned an operation called High Capacity.
Right. And they're also involved in fighting cybercrime. One operation disrupted nearly 200 attacks for intrusions. They have a special unit for investigating human rights violators and war criminals, the HRVWCC.
HRVWCC.
Okay. Yeah, that unit supported over 180 investigations, created hundreds of lookout records. HSI also did over 450 counterterrorism investigations and works on dismantling human smuggling networks, like through Joint Task Force Alpha, JTFA, which involves DOJ and other agencies focusing on Mexico, Central America, and now Colombia and Panama, too.
And just as an example of how broad HSI's work can be, the report mentioned that case about counterfeit Cisco networking gear, something you wouldn't maybe immediately link to IC.
Exactly. They investigated, got a conviction, kept potentially compromised equipment out of sensitive networks. It really shows the range of serious crime HSI deals with.
Okay, and there's a third component mentioned in the sources, OPLA, Office of the Principal Legal Advisor.
That's ICE's legal team. And actually, the report says it's the biggest legal shop within all of DHS. Over 1,700 attorneys.
And what's their main job?
Their main role is representing DHS, basically, the government in immigration court. These are the administrative removal proceedings that happen before the Justice Department's immigration courts and the Board of Immigration Appeals, the BIA.
And connecting back to that huge caseload number, the report says at the end of FY24, the immigration courts, EOIR, had over 3.5 million pending cases where OPLA is the prosecuting attorney.
Yeah. 3.5 million. It's an enormous workload. And the report's pretty blunt. It says the growth in cases without a matching increase in resources was the civil biggest challenge for all of ICE, including OPLA, in FY24.
Makes sense.
OPLA also handles lawsuits against ICE in federal court and represents the agency in other places, too, like employment disputes.
And finally, on the structure piece, the report mentioned an office called ORA, Office of Regulatory Affairs and Policy, that handles policy updates.
Yeah, they coordinate developing agency-wide policies. The report gave a couple of FY24 examples, like a new policy on body-worn cameras and another one about prosecutorial discretion for victims and witnesses in exploitative labor cases.
Prosecutorial discretion
Meaning, in certain cases where someone is a victim or witness helping investigate labor exploitation, OPLA might agree to temporarily pause their deportation case, give them deferred action or a stay of removal, potentially for up to 4 years under this policy. So policy work happens.
Okay, so we have ERO doing interior enforcement, HSI doing criminal investigations, OPLA handling the legal side. How does this play out in the real world? The sources gave some examples.
Right. There was that DHS press release about an HSI operation in Charleston. They targeted a nightclub described as Cartel Run, made over 70 arrests. The release really framed it as going after a transnational criminal organization working with local police. That fits HSI's mission.
But then we saw those news clips and social media posts about raids at restaurants in San Diego. That seemed different, especially the reaction.
Very different reaction there. Lower politicians, like Representative Juan Vargas and Mayor Todd Gloria, were quoted speaking out strongly against those operations, called them needlessly reckless. And they specifically questioned the type of warrant used or if there even was a proper judicial warrant to enter.
And the sources said the community rallied around the businesses.
Yeah, community support was noted, so pushback from officials and the public.
Which makes the Minneapolis example interesting. The sheriff there seemed to be dealing with a similar situation, but handled it very differently.
Completely differently. She put out a statement to clarify that an incident there was not an immigration raid. It was an HSI-led criminal investigation using search warrants, targeting a transnational criminal group.
And she really pushed back on rumors, didn't she?
She did. She criticized what she called irresponsible rumors from elected officials, saying they could incite riots, and really stressed getting accurate information from official channels.
That contrast is really something. San Diego. Officials criticize perceived immigration tactics, question warrants, community rallies. Minneapolis. Sheriff corrects the narrative, emphasizes its HSI criminal work, warns against misinformation.
It really highlights how messy these situations can be on the ground, how they're perceived, and how communication or miscommunication plays a huge role.
Yeah.
And the sources briefly mention other things too, like raids at bars in Texas. And there was that excerpt about former President Trump pledging a big deportation crackdown. Just shows these types of operations and the politics around them are ongoing issues.
Definitely. Okay, let's clarify a really fundamental point using the Immigrant Defense Project source, who can actually be deported under U.S. law. It's not always who you might think.
Right. The source breaks it down into a few main categories. First, pretty obviously, people who don't have lawful immigration status. Maybe they overstayed a visa, crossed the border without permission, arrived by boat, things like that.
But it's not just people without status, right? That seems to be a common misconception.
Absolutely not. The source is very clear. People with lawful status can also be deported if they have certain criminal convictions. That includes green card holders, people on valid visas like student or work visas, even refugees or asylees, folks with TPS or U visas, DACA recipients.
So having papers doesn't automatically protect you if there's a criminal conviction involved.
Correct. The type of crime, when it happened, the sentence. Those details matter a lot legally. But yes, legal status holders can be deportable. The third group mentioned are people who are already in the U.S. after an immigration judge ordered them removed. These are sometimes called PFO cases, post-final order.
Okay, so among all the potentially deportable people, who does the IDP source say is at the highest risk of actually being arrested and detained by ICE?
Their assessment is that the highest risk categories are people who already have that final deportation order from a judge and people who get arrested for criminal offenses, which can bring them to ICE's attention.
And the source also mentions something about expecting new priority.
Yeah, this source was from December 2024, and it noted that ICE was expected to announce its specific enforcement priorities in January 2025. So those might provide more detail on current targeting.
Got it. Now, shifting focus a bit, the source materials included some historical images. What was the point of those?
They seem to be there to provide context, showing how immigration enforcement and ideas about who belongs or is a threat have shifted over time. There is an image related to the Chinese Exclusion Act back in the 1880s.
Right, I saw that.
Really blatant discriminatory signs like Japs keep moving or no Irish need apply. An old newspaper headline about Reds raided during anti-communist scares leading to deportations.
So the source uses these to illustrate this idea of hierarchies of belonging and how different groups get targeted at different times.
Exactly, framing it as shifting targets of constructed threats. And it connects that longer history to more recent legal changes, specifically pointing to what it calls the 1996 harsh immigration laws.
Okay, 1996. What laws were those and what did they do according to the sources?
The big ones mentioned are the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, AEDPA, and the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, IIRA.
And their impact.
According to the source, huge impact. They dramatically expanded the list of crimes that could lead to deportation, sometimes even for old convictions. They made detention mandatory for more people and severely restricted judges' ability to grant relief from deportation, even for long-term residents. Basically made the system much more focused on detention and deportation and intertwined it more closely with the criminal justice system.
And we also saw brief mentions in the sources from groups like the ACLU talking about ending mass detention and the Polaris Project on supporting trafficking survivors.
Right, just showing the breadth of issues that intersect with ICE's work detention conditions, human trafficking victim protections. It touches a lot of areas that generate advocacy and debate.
Okay, one more operational aspect mentioned in that ICE FY24 report, alternatives to detention, or ATD.
Yeah, ATD. Given that huge number we talked about, over 7.6 million on the non-detained docket versus maybe 38,000 in detention on average, they clearly can't detain everyone. So ATD, as the report describes it, is like an intermediate supervision level for some people who aren't detained.
A way to keep track of some folks without using a detention bed. What does that involve, tech-wise?
The main program is ISAP Intensive Supervision Appearance Program. The report says it uses things like telephonic check-ins, GPS ankle monitors for some, and biometric facial comparison tech. They also mentioned rolling out a new wrist-worn device nationwide in FY24, says it uses tech like a consumer smartwatch.
Interesting. Is it just tech surveillance, or is there more to it?
The report says there's also case management involved. Things like orientation, check-ins at home or in office, know your rights presentations, help keeping track of court dates, and making individualized service plans to provide support.
Okay. Now, this next part, based heavily on the Immigrant Defense Project source, feels really practical and important for anyone potentially interacting with ISAP. Knowing your rights.
Absolutely critical. The source stresses, number one, if someone comes to your door claiming to be ICE, identify them before you open the door or answer any questions. Ask to see their badge, get their name, maybe ask them to slide an ID under the door.
Good idea. And ask if they're local police, too.
Yes, definitely ask if they're local police and which precinct, because the rules might be different. Then, crucially, ask if they have a warrant. Ask them to slide that under the door so you can look at it. Maybe take a picture with your phone.
And this is where that warrant distinction comes in that the source highlighted, right? It's confusing.
It is super confusing, and this is key. IC officers often have a document signed by an ICE supervisor that says warrant for arrest of alien or something similar. But according to the IDP source, that immigration warrant signed by ICE itself generally does not give them the legal right to enter your home without your consent.
So what do they need to enter your home without consent?
They generally need a judicial warrant. That means a warrant signed by an actual judge, which requires probable cause of a crime, a higher standard. The source emphasizes that ICE usually doesn't have one of those for simple immigration enforcement at someone's home.
That's a huge difference. So just because they show you a paper that says warrant doesn't mean you have to let them in your house.
According to this source, that's the critical point for home entries, unless there are exceptional circumstances. Now, they also note ICE operates in public places, workplaces, where the rules about encounters are different.
And knowing your local laws matters, too.
Definitely. The source gave examples like New York State's Protect Our Courts Act, limiting ICE arrests near courthouses without a judicial warrant. NYC has similar rules for places like schools and shelters. But the source also warned that ICE was expected to rescind its own internal sensitive locations policy from 2011, which could mean fewer places are considered off-limits for enforcement. So staying updated is important.
Beyond just encounters at the door, what other general advice did the IDP source have?
Basic but important stuff. Know your A number. That's your alien registration number. Keep copies of all your immigration documents safe. You can check the status of your case online through the EOIR portal or by phone, though the source reminds you that's for convenience. The actual court papers are the official record.
And keeping your address current seems vital.
Absolutely critical. If you move, you have to update your address with the immigration court or USCIS if you have a case pending. Otherwise, you might miss crucial notices, including hearing dates. And attending all your immigration court hearings is essential. Missing one can lead to an order of removal in absentia.
The source also really pushes getting individualized legal advice.
Yes. They suggest getting a consultation with an immigration lawyer or accredited representative to understand your specific situation, options you might have, and your actual risk level. They point to resources like the Immigrant Advocates Network directory to find help.
And IDP itself offers guides and things.
Yeah, they have Know Your Rights materials, info specifically about potential tricks or lies ICE might use, even posters you can put on your door stating your rights. Often in multiple languages, trying to get the information out there.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here today, really digging into the source material you provided. We looked at ICE's structure inside DHS, the different jobs and sheer scale of ERO and HSI, seen through their stats and those operational examples. We touched on OPLA's legal role, clarified who's legally deportable and who the sources see as most at risk, got some historical context, looked at alternatives to detention, and finished with that really crucial info on rights during encounters.
Yeah, the goal was really to pull out the essential knowledge from all these different documents, the reports, the articles, the advocacy materials, and give you a clear, informed overview.
And as you, the listener, kind of digest all of this, it's worth thinking about the different viewpoints here, right? You have the official government reports detailing arrests, seizures, operations. Then you have the advocacy groups focusing on the human impact, the rights issues, the community reactions we saw in places like San Diego. and the differing takes from local law enforcement, like in Minneapolis.
Yeah, it's complex.
Hmm.
How do all those pieces, the official stats, the human stories, legal arguments, the local politics fit together for you? What kind of picture does it paint of immigration enforcement in the U.S. today? And maybe, what bigger questions does it leave you with?